everyone. I'm so happy to see that you are all here already on the early Monday morning. I am Elina Mikola from Fingo, the Finnish Development NGOs, and I have a pleasure to welcome you all to this seminar, Transformation to a Climate Neutral Society, the Role of Beyond GDP Indicators. This seminar has been organized in partnership with the project Dialogue on European Decarbonization Strategies, the DEED project. And this open seminar also starts our two-day conference, Beyond Growth, Indicators and Politics for People and Planet. So those of you who have also participating in the Beyond Growth conference will continue with these interesting themes until Tuesday. I have been very much looking forward to this seminar that will explore the role that Beyond GDP indicators could play in monitoring of social and economic aspects of the transformation towards climate neutrality and circular economy. So we will have really interesting 2 hours ahead of us. But without any more delay, I am happy to give the stage to Mr. Adrian Slob from DEED project, and he is the chair and moderator of this seminar.
I hope this works. Can you hear me? Is it on? No, not yet. Can you hear me now? Ooh, yeah? Yeah? No? Still not? Yeah? Okay. It will work, hopefully. Maybe you can adjust it just as that you can hear me well. Yeah, we have 2 hours ahead of us, but a little bit less. I was instructed to keep the time exactly on 11:30, so I will do that. But I also want to welcome you very warmly to this session. In this session, we made a kind of menu for you, in which we can explore the role of Beyond GDP indicators in the whole decarbonization issue, or the energy transition towards a climate neutral society, which is a big thing. It's not an easy way to do. So there are many social issues also around. So hopefully we can explore that with you in a very nice manner. We have made it a little bit interactive. So this is a session where I don't ask you to put out your phones. Exactly, you are asked to put it on. But I will tell you later about that. First, let me introduce the topic of today. I have to put this on. I coordinate the DEED project. That's all about the decarbonization of Europe in the future. And we have those energy transition pathways, as you can call them. And we are exploring them and looking how can we come to a decarbonized Europe in 2050. And GDP indicators can play a role in that. I would like to stress that it's more talking about what's happening now. It doesn't work. Okay, it works again. Okay, you are pushing the button now. Okay, good. I think it's something where 2 worlds meet. I have 2 feet, one in every of these worlds. One is the Beyond GDP world, in which there's a lot of debate about what are the right indicators, what are the good policies, etc. And we are living in an area that we are thinking, well, economic growth, what is it? What should it be? And should it be GDP or a little bit more than that? And I think it should be more than that. On the other hand, the world of the decarbonization. I think in both worlds I have my feet in. Can I have the next one? So there, in the GDP world, it's the discussion about there's more than one metric. We have the GDP that's not a very old indicator, actually. If you look up at the internet, then you will see that it's something that was introduced after the Second World War, and that it doesn't measure everything that is important. If you look at the internet, you can find a speech of Robert Kennedy from 1968, in which he explains what it doesn't measure. And that's a lot. It doesn't measure well-being or environmental prosperity, etc. And what we did in the past, we finished that in 2014, was the Brainpool project. You still can find lots of the documents of Brainpool on ResearchGate if you go to it. On the other hand, we have the climate neutral society, and it's not a technical thing. The climate neutral society means that the society has to transform. So there are deep changes in technology, but also in economy, in the governance, in the behavior. And if you go to the DEET's website, and I've indicated that over there, you can find some of these documents, but especially the report of the high-level panel, and I will come to that. So from Brainpool, you can find that there are many and very different indicator sets available. You also have the discussion about could we bring in one indicator, but we found that's not a very good thing to do. Probably you need sets of indicators or indicator dashboards. And if you want to have those sets that they underpin your policy process, then it's the best to make that more a participative process, because then you can give meaning to those indicators. A number as such doesn't mean so much. You need a context in which it can become more alive. So the meaningful application of Beyond GDP level is more on the local or regional level, where you really can participate and have a debate on what do I see? What kind of indicators are measuring the reality? And the last thing that we found in the Brainpool project is that the Beyond GDP indicators really require a kind of an integrated approach from policy. And that's always a very big thing. And that's one of the things in which we have a similarity with the decarbonization issue. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, what I already mentioned, the high-level panel of the European Decarbonization Pathways Initiative. That's the main thing that we did with the DEET's project to support the high-level panel in making a report. And I will show that in the next slide. It contains a lot of research and innovation recommendations on different topics that are important. No, sorry, not yet. On different topics on, yeah, it's directly, if I say next slide, then somebody's pushing the button, but I don't need it right now. Energy, transport, industry, agriculture, all those sectors that are very important for the CO2 emissions, but there were also some integrative chapters on cities, on social innovation, and on the economic implications. So at the end, we will deliver some input to Horizon Europe with some recommendations on the next topics for that program, for that next research program. Can I have the next slide? And that's about the high-level panel. I will not introduce the complete panel, but I'm glad that Beata Jachewska is here. She was involved in the actually heading the chapter on social innovation and the behavioral change. If you want to find the report, it's 150 pages. You can easily find it on the internet. If you Google on final report, high-level panel decarbonization, then probably you will easily find it. Can I have the next slide? So in between these two worlds, the Beyond GDP world and the decarbonization pathways world, there are a couple of issues that we could explore today. In the Clean Planet for All strategy of the European Union, which is a vision for 2050, there's one thing that is important to the Commission, and it's the socially fair transition like with the sentence, not leaving any EU citizens or regions behind. So that's something that we can explore. What kind of role could Beyond GDP indicators play in that? So monitoring the energy transition with Beyond GDP indicators could be something new to do. So at the end, we want to give with this session an input to the Beyond Growth conference, so this conference, but also to Horizon Europe. If we have some recommendations that fit into the research and innovation part of Europe, then it's possible to come up with those. Can I have the last slide? That's the program for today. The next speaker will be Brille Anderson of the OECD. She will talk on the decarbonization policies through a well-being lens. And after her talk, we have a reflection of Paavo Järvensivu of BIOS. And after that, we will have a plenary discussion with the panel. I will instruct how you can also participate in that. And at 11:20, we want to close off so that we are really finished at 11:30. So the next speaker is Brille Anderson. Brille is a policy analyst in the climate change mitigation team at OECD and a key contributor to the project on accelerating climate action, refocusing policies to a well-being lens. This report investigates the linkages between well-being and climate change mitigation across sectors. She holds a PhD in behavioral economics. Brille, I want to ask you to come to the stage. You have 25 minutes. You need a microphone, huh? Yeah, you.
Hello? And does this work? No? Okay. All right. So as Adrian introduced me, I'm from the OECD. I work on the climate change mitigation team, and today I'm here to present our new report, Refocusing Policies Through a Wellbeing Lens, Accelerating Climate Action. Can you click the slide? So today I'm going to start off by talking about the relationship between mitigation and the Beyond Growth. And then I'm going to go into the three main parts of our report. It's the necessity to rethink sectoral priorities for mitigation, to reframe measurement to foster mitigation and well-being, and then how we can refocus mitigation policies. Next slide. So I think all of us who are, is everything okay? No, the pointer's over there. Okay, so I mean, all of us here have sort of recognized the challenges of never-ending growth and how this is leading us to unsustainable choices, as well as how this is framing our response to many societal challenges, including the climate crisis. Can you click the slide, please? And click until all these boxes are filled. There you go, that's good. So essentially that's also what we've been doing at the OECD. Over the past 20 years, we've been trying to make the economic case for climate change mitigation. This goes back from 2 decades ago on to more recently. And I think that there are many reasons why there is an economic case for mitigation. I think we see that the costs of action now are less than the costs of inaction and dealing with the catastrophic consequences of climate change. I also think we've estimated the stranded assets that could occur because of climate change. We've estimated the financial risks, and so far we haven't really mobilized and seen the action that we wanted to see. Could you please click the slide? Okay. So, I mean, basically what we see is that global CO2 continues to rise. We're 63% over where we were in 1990. We also know that we've already warmed 1 degree. We know that July was the hottest year on record. And many of the commitments under the Paris Agreement will fail to keep us below 1.5 degrees and also 2 degrees. If we continue on the present path that we are, we'll have 3-degree warming by the end of the century. And And basically, most of the commitments under the Paris Agreement aren't even going to be met, actually. So this is kind of a dismal situation. Next slide, please. And then on top of that, I think there was a really pivotal report last year with the IPCC's special report on sort of illuminating and demarcating a 1.5 degree world versus a 2 degree world. And what we saw is that the major differences in a 2 degree world will have challenges to meet any of the sustainable development goals. We can expect water insecurity, food insecurity, many health issues, and in a quite stark way, we also know that we have only a decade essentially to change the course and stay below 1.5 degrees C. So it's sort of in this foundation of sort of understanding that we've been trying to use the economic case to accelerate climate action, and that hasn't really worked. Also, this report made it abundantly clear that we are running out of time. So may you advance the slide, please? So that was sort of the launching off point for this report, Accelerating Climate Action and Refocusing Policies Through a Wellbeing Lens. And essentially, we think that this may be a way to accelerate climate action if we shift from a sort of economic cost-benefit analysis to switch to show how mitigation can advance current and future well-being. Can you please click? So the report covers 5 sectors. We talk about electricity, heavy industry, surface transport, residential, and agriculture. In the agriculture chapter, we don't go into land use issues, but we do go into a food system issues. Can you advance? And sort of what we mean by the well-being lens is essentially what I said, is that we replace sort of the GDP and the growth narrative by a well-being narrative. So a good example of this is New Zealand, who's basically enshrined, the Department of Treasury discusses the well-being budget, and they keep track of the 4 types of natural capital, and not only GDP. And so essentially we believe you need to sort of define societal priorities by well-being objectives. You need to sort of integrate this across the economy, and you need to sort of pursue multiple objectives at the same time. And our analytical framework is the OECD Wellbeing Framework that was developed by colleagues in the Statistics Directorate. And essentially this is quite nice because it has many indicators for quality of life, material conditions, but a very nice and unique dimension is the resources for future well-being. So they say, you know, we don't just want well-being now, but we want to ensure that generations after us also have well-being. Could you please advance? So each of the sectoral chapters have covered these 3 themes. And so first, I want to talk to you about the necessity to rethink sectoral priorities for mitigation. Can you please advance? And essentially what we asked ourselves, what is the single or few objectives being pursued in this sector? How does this impact greenhouse gas emissions and well-being? And then how do we need to redefine these sectoral priorities? So it's a bit of what is the beyond GDP in each of the sectors, essentially. Can you please advance? So essentially, so what we see is in heavy industry, which is your steel, your cement, your aluminum, your petrochemicals, we're maximizing production. And I mean, and this makes sense in terms of we've had growing population, growing urbanization, growing standards of living, and so we see, but this is also drastically increasing greenhouse gases because we don't know how to decarbonize many of those sectors at this point in time. For, not yet, sorry. For transport, we see that the goal tends to be maximizing physical movement. So we predict where traffic will be and we decarbonize more we build more roads. But this predict and provide approach and only looking at physical movement by its very nature increases greenhouse gases because it's going to increase private vehicle usage. In residential, to date, the main focus has been putting a roof over people's heads, but we know in many OECD countries, low-income housing tends to be the most energy inefficient, and so they tend to have very high costs. And then not only, they tend to put low-income housing on the outskirts of a city, which means that most low-income families have to pay exorbitantly more for transport costs. Agriculture, our focus has been the quantity of food, not necessarily the quality of food. And I mean, we've been trying to boost the quantity of food so much that we've sort of increased our reliance on synthetic fertilizers and nitrous oxide. And then lastly, the focus has mainly been on electricity and providing affordable and reliable electricity. Please advance. Yeah. And so basically what we did is we kind of applied our well-being lens and we said, what is the impact of this priority? And then if you advance again. And we think, you know, these priorities are often a byproduct of the growth narrative, but they lend to increasing GHGs as we see. And also losses of well-being more generally. We see poor health, we see less biodiversity. And so basically we said, how do we need to redefine our priorities in each sector, not only so that we have mitigation, but also so that we have broader well-being? Please advance. So essentially, we asked ourselves, okay, what should the focus be to accelerate climate action? And in heavy industry, we need to shift towards sustainable production. In transport, we need to start doing accessibility-based planning. So by accessibility-based planning, I mean, we want to see how it takes someone to get from point A to point B. So A could be their home, B could be their job, their child's school, their leisure activities. We need to start thinking about transport in this way and start making our cities more accessible than just building more roads. We also, for residential, need to consider the quality and the location of housing so that it's actually affordable. In agriculture, we need to think about the quality as well as the quantity. And electricity, we need to transition towards sustainable, affordable, and reliable electricity. Thank you. And I think one of the biggest points, and also something that Adrian pointed on, is that you need more than one metric, and also you need more than one goal. If we only make policies in a GDP growth mindset, and if we only make policies with a mitigation mindset, we will have adverse consequences. I think that was quite evident with the Gilets jaunes in Paris, how that policy was made really from a mitigation perspective instead of thinking about everyone's well-being. So if you advance again. And I think another good example of this is electric vehicles, which is often touted as a solution for decarbonizing transport, and it is a solution for decarbonizing transport. But if we look at that through a well-being lens, what we see is, can you click? I mean, we know the predict and provide approach does nothing for congestion. We also know that every time we build more roads, we just actually have more congestion. The electric vehicle is not going to do anything for that problem or for those other affordability and accessibility issues that stem from that. Can you advance? Noise pollution, it might not do anything. If you can just keep advancing. Accessibility and affordability, those low-income individuals who are outside cities, is the electric vehicle actually going to change their life and their well-being? If you continue, and also the greenhouse gases from materials. So the IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, but they do a lot of projections of how can we achieve 2 degrees in each sector, what is the contribution each sector needs to make. And essentially we estimated what would be the materials demand if EVs increased globally as the IEA estimates, and we see that that would increase materials anywhere between 300% to 700%. And the materials that we're talking about are steel, aluminum, things that we don't exactly know how to decarbonize yet and do in a zero-emission way. So these are the linkages that we have to start thinking about when we approach mitigation. We have to start thinking about the interactions between sectors and thinking about broader well-being when we're sort of creating our decarbonization strategies. Can you advance? Thank you. Another one. So, and then also in the report, so in each of the sectoral chapters, we talk about this shift in perspective, and then we talk about how we need to reframe measurement to sort of advance mitigation and well-being. Please advance. And so we asked sort of how can we keep track of towards achieving this sectoral shift and the impact of mitigation on well-being. So if you advance. And so I'm just going to give one example from the chapter on heavy industry. So typically when we talk about heavy industry, we talk about productivity, and we talk about productivity because that links to GDP growth. And as often happens in many treasuries, The Economist, even the Directorate of Economics at the OECD, essentially what we see is we break down GDP growth into what's the contribution of capital, what's the contribution of labor, and then we have this elusive concept, total factor productivity or multi-factor productivity, and that essentially is so what's the proportion of GDP growth that can't be accounted for by capital, so our machines, our plants, whatever, and what can't be accounted for by labor and our workers? And so then we talk about total factor productivity. And the thing is, at the moment, that metric can increase at the expense of the environment. It can increase by polluting and having more emissions. And so if you advance, so basically, colleagues at the OECD have created a new measure, which is the environmentally adjusted total factor productivity, where sort of this is the increase in GDP if countries are going to continue to use GDP. That is not due to capital, it's not due to labor, but it's also not due to the degradation of the environment and consumption of natural capital. So this is one indicator that we refer to in the report. Please advance. And then lastly, in each of the sectoral chapters, we talk about how we need to refocus mitigation policies. So if you could advance. And then again. And then one more time, there we go. I want to go back to the example of transport. And so what we see is the focus has been on physical movement. We also see that we've been basically trying to predict traffic and provide roads, and this has also informed our decarbonization strategy. So when we talk about how to decarbonize transport, we tend to talk about let's increase the use of electric vehicles, let's create lightweight vehicles, let's remove diesel cars from the road. And so the policies that we choose are sort of standards or certifications, or only certain cars are allowed in the center of the city. And if you click again, but if we see that through a well-being lens, we see, yeah, it may reduce GHGs, but it's not doing a ton for congestion or noise pollution or improving safety. If you click again, if we switched our mindset to accessibility-based planning, and we said, okay, our goal is not to build more roads. Our goal is actually to help an individual get from point A to point B. And we start thinking about accessibility, then basically more mitigation policies appear, and our emphasis and our decarbonization strategy changes. So instead of just improving sort of a potentially misallocation, we talk about let's avoid private vehicle use and let's shift towards shared modes of transport. And so that might change the mitigation policies. For example, you might start reallocating road space. You might say, actually, we're going to put in a tram here, or we're going to put in a bike lane here. We're going to make it easier for someone to get from point A to point B. And so basically, this is what we do in the last part of each of the sectoral chapters. We say, if we really put well-being at the center of policymaking, even at the center of mitigation policymaking, how does that change our approach to mitigation? And we think that if we do this, we might be able to convince countries to actually act. If you advance one more time. So if you click, so this is already available online. So that's sort of the shift in priorities and the reframing measurements. And this last part where we really talk about how this changes our approach to mitigation, if you click, that one is going to be available in early 2020. And so if you click one more time. So that's it. Thank you very much. We actually have a fee for accessing reports, but we are providing complimentary access. And so this is the username and the password. I also have little business cards, like things that I can give you as well for the username and password. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brile. I couldn't have wished a better introduction to the theme, I think, because everything was in there. Especially that last part was about that integrated approach to policy making, which I already stressed upon in my first part, which is one of the big challenges, I think. Only one. There are many, many. I'd like to ask Paavo Järvensivu. Please come to the stage. You have 10 minutes to give your reflection on what you've heard so far. The bottom on the, yeah.
Now? Yeah. All right. Good day, everyone. And thank you especially, Brile, for the very good talk. So my reflection comes from the perspective of BIOS Research Unit. We do multidisciplinary environmental studies in the Finnish context. So from that perspective, I can say that as a kind of a technical policy frame, I can easily agree with everything I heard and what I read from the report earlier. And I'd like to offer some highlights from my perspective. So what I want to emphasize from this report, also after hearing Brile's talk. We can't have effective climate action if we don't pursue social goals at the same time. This is becoming very clear now. And second, GDP as a unifying goal, it obscures what policies really should and should not pursue. So for instance, we can't be celebrating the growth of just any kind of production while trying to lower emissions and natural resource use. Moreover, we have to look more closely for the qualitative differences of different economies and economic sectors, and this is something you've done nicely in the report. So there's no one policy that would fit all and fix all. Also, these kind of punitive, qualitatively neutral policies such as carbon pricing, they are very useful but not enough. And this is something not always recognized in policymaking. So it's becoming also clear that transforming these kind of socio-technical systems that you also described briefly, it needs comprehensive visions. What is it that we are trying to pursue when we are transforming these systems? It also needs coordination between different actors, and it also needs long-term funding to make these changes happen. And this is something that kind of naturally comes for the state or the public power to do. Also, there needs to be a sense of comprehensibility. So that we are not lost in these complexities of current systems. So although today's critical systems, for example, transport in cities, they are very complex, but we must kind of acknowledge that we can still understand and manage them somehow. They are not incomprehensible. Of course, we can't manage them through the kind of tight control systems, but we can manage them as these kind of complex evolving processes. We can't solve them just like that, but through continuous management we can transform them, I believe. So we basically, BIOS was asked to do an expert statement on Finnish government's budget proposal for 2020. Just last week, and basically we identified all the same issues that is in this report. So I can say that it was very useful that we could refer to an OECD report when critiquing and also suggesting an alternative policy frame for the kind of basic growth fixated policy paradigm. So what kind of became very clear for us when reading the budget proposal was that although Finland has a very strong climate neutrality goal, we aim to be carbon neutral in 2035, the budget proposal, it doesn't make clear how far we are from this target. So it's impossible through reading the proposal to understand what still needs to be done, what is the kind of, how big a problem we are facing, basically, and where are all those problems. And if you consider that, contrast that with the kind of traditional economic goals and figures, they are monitored very closely. We read about them in the news every day, how much is the employment rate now estimated to grow or not grow and so on. But in terms of climate goals, we are not even beginning to kind of analyze or see how far we are and what we still need to do. So I really hope that we can use, for instance, this OECD report to improve next year's proposals. But still, I would like to emphasize that we need to remember that this is still a kind of a technical report. So in some sense, it's from the elite to the elite. So I would like to, for the last part, I would like to kind of consider that quite a bit remains to be done more locally. For instance, in translating these ideas into something more widely meaningful in the Finnish context. So I believe that we need an overall framework that is broadly meaningful to us right now, living here in Finland, for instance. Of course, this is applicable, the idea, to everywhere. So I think that a kind of a two-way well-being lens is probably kind of not something that is will be talked about in tabloids or coffee rooms in corporations and so on. So we need something that kind of an orienting narrative through which we understand what are we doing actually, what are the goals and what is our place in achieving those goals. And this is one of the reasons why we in BIOS Research Unit we have started to talk about ecological reconstruction as an overall kind of orienting narrative. It has a historical reference to the post-Second World War era, reconstruction era. So it's a story that everyone, at least here, knows and cares about. It's part of our kind of identity and so on. And it has, of course, been a reality in many different countries as well, but it played out differently. But it's not just kind of a metaphor. We can also learn from that era. For instance, there was a really strong consensus that society has to be rebuilt after the war. Not only the physical infrastructure was rebuilt, but also the institutional ground was laid for building all the great welfare state institutions that we still have in place. And this is, of course, something we need to do now as well. As you said, it's not a and you said it's not a technical thing only. We need deeper changes in our thinking and practices and so on. Also, in the kind of reconstruction era, the economy, it didn't tell society what to do and what can be done. The economy didn't tell society what to do and what can be done. It was the other way around. So we gave the economy goals. The economy was put to work to achieve the material and social goals that were put together politically as a consensus. And lastly, I think we have to also remember that humans are not calculators. So kind of too much focus on rational trade-offs, I think it can be very off-putting, which is part of the problems with kind of having too much focus on indicators also. For example, in the case of over-consuming families, who of us wouldn't be in such families, making do with less stuff could lead to improved everyday life. This is certain. It's not only taking away, but making do with less stuff could be actually beneficial for us. But such changes in life, they don't really happen through rational calculation. It is more about the stories we tell each other and to ourselves. And it's also about moralities. We may actually do what we feel is right rather than trying to calculate what are our actions' effects on the planetary level. So with these ideas, I'd like to thank for the excellent report and really hope to contribute how it's further used and discussed in the Finnish context. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pavel. Also for keeping everything in time, because we are back on track, especially thanks to Brille, because you were a little bit shorter. Very good. So now we come to the nice part, I hope, of this session and where you can interact. And I want to ask the panel members to come to the stage. Ulla Rosenström, Atte Harjanne, Beate Jachewska, Mohammed Shahim and Brille. Please sit down, make yourself comfortable. There are nice chairs over there. Yeah, there are 6 chairs, but we have 5 persons, so I maybe also can sit next to you, but I prefer standing here. First, I'd like to ask to introduce yourself very shortly. Brille, I already introduced you. Maybe you want to add something to it? No, it was good for you. Take the microphone, Beata, and please introduce yourself very quickly.
Good morning. You have already introduced me as well. So I had the pleasure and the privilege to be working in this high-level panel together with these fantastic personalities, as you could see on the picture. And I was invited there because I have a very unusual, as for a civil servant, adventure in my professional life. I was serving as a climate minister for my country, for Poland, and you know how it is. I mean, you've heard about the climate policies for Poland, so you can imagine that it was not the easiest job ever. So that is my profile and the reason I was invited and happy to be here with you today.
Thank you, Beata. Mohammed.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mohammed Shahim. I'm, since July, a member of the European Parliament for the Social Democrats, where I work specifically on the environmental climate issues, and I do a little bit on innovation and research and energy. I think both are related. Before this, I was a scientist in economic ecological modeling at an institute which name I cannot use, but Adriaan knows it very well, I think. And I was for 13 years a member of the local municipality in the Netherlands. So yeah, I think a lot of things that I've done come together when we talk about beyond GDP monitoring. That's it.
Thank you. Ulla.
Good morning. I'm Ulla Rosenström from the Finnish Prime Minister's office, where my main task is to monitor the government program, whether it's been implemented and also whether the targets in the government program are being met. I have worked with indicators about 25 years. I just realized this morning that it's usually been selecting indicators. I don't think I've ever actually developed an indicator. It's select indicators and then presenting them and desperately trying to get them used by the policymakers. Thank you.
Yep. Hi everyone. So I'm Atte Harjanne from around here. So I'm a member of Parliament in Finland and also a member of the Helsinki City Council from the Green Party. And I also have some research background before this stuff. And yeah, that's about it. So I really consider that this is a topic we should debate not only with the ones who know about this stuff, but which should be brought into more light also whenever we're talking about the strategy of our strategic goals of our country or city or whatever. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. I see that the Screen IO thing is up. That means that you should try to make connection to this one. Do we have more of a kind of guidance how to do it? Because I think it's... Okay, enter the address directly onto your device browser. The messages will be received and you'll be able to follow them on your device. So you need to open your browser, then go to the one screen.io and then /beyondgrowth. And then later on I will ask you to vote on the statements. So in the meantime that you are trying to make the connection, I like to have the first statement on the screen. We prepare them with the eye on the discussion more in the broader sense. They are not very technical, so hopefully you can jump into the discussion. Can I have them? Sorry? Oh, they are. Oh, yeah, of course. This is my mistake. I was so much into how I normally do this that I just get into that routine. You have them on the papers. The statements are on the paper. So also the explanation, and we start with statement number 1. Every time we start with that, with the statement, I will read them to you, a little bit explaining them, and then I'll ask the panel members to give their view on it, and then I open the floor to you. So the first one is about monitoring of climate action, and its social and economic impacts should be done at the regional or local level. I already introduced that a little bit in my opening talk. At this level, Beyond GDP monitoring can play a strategic role for policy making and information provision to all societal stakeholders. So it has to be, the Beyond GDP has to play a role for people to make decisions, but not only the decision makers, but also inform societal stakeholders. And the explanation is climate action and policy measures will have a direct impact in each regional context, depending on economic specialization patterns with dominant actors and assets. For each context, specific and reliable information is needed on impacts at the regional and local level to ensure an inclusive and just transition in which no region will be left behind. And furthermore, the context-specific monitoring results can be discussed with the societal actors as to give meaning to these results, which is an important basis for further joint actions, benchmark, or exchange of experiences. So I like to invite the panel to give their view. May I first ask Ulla to give your view on this statement?
Thank you. Well, I think absolutely we need regional and local data on this because many decisions, of course, affect people on the regional levels in a different way than you would look at the whole country, but especially with this climate action where the regions are very different. And then, like I said, we are really affecting the everyday lives of people, and especially if I'm thinking of the transport section, where distances can be very different and the demographic differences are great. And I mean, I would say that you also, of course, we usually use national data, national averages, because that's how we compare with the other countries and how we fill our international obligations. But actually, also in some other indicator discussions, we have seen that some people feel distrust towards indicators when we are talking about national averages, and they hear the national average, for example, for unemployment, that it's, if it's 7% or something, but you live in somewhere further out in the countryside where the unemployment rate is 20%. So then you feel that this 7% can't be right, and you don't feel that statistics and indicators are actually telling you the truth. So even for the sake of statistics for the citizens to feel that they're right, I think it's very important to use regional and local data. And of course for decision makers, for politicians to know their areas, to know where the issues are, where the problems are. So I think that is very important. It's, of course, it's practically, it's sometimes unusually, or it's hard for me to understand sometimes how difficult it is to get this regional local data. It seems to cost more and it's hard to get. But I think we should make efforts to make more use of that. And I've actually, when I've talked with policymakers, decision makers, trying to get them to use indicators, they often say that they would prefer to have regional and local data, that these national averages that we tend to use are not very welcome. So these are my first comments.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, you are the second one.
Yeah, I do agree that certain indicators on a national level indeed don't say much, don't don't say a story, to tell a story to the people locally. Yeah? If indeed GDP is growing by 2% and people lose their job, they will just say, I mean, these indicators don't say much with respect to myself. Fortunately, I was for 13 years a member of the local municipality or local parliament in the Netherlands, and it's a city called Helmond. And in the Netherlands, we have this index that we use on a municipal level. It's called the Atlas van de Gemeente, Atlas of the Municipalities. And it's a very interesting index because for years now it has been gathering information from the municipalities, and it tries to say a story about specifically well-being on a local city level. And for me as a city councillor at the time, it was very interesting to wait to look at the publication and see how my city developed. So it looked at average, like the number of people that have certain diseases, whether people finish their education, how easy it is to find a house, a big set of indicators. It's called the Atlas van de Gemeente. It's, I think, an NGO that develops it based on data given by municipalities. Municipalities have much more data than they usually think. Mostly it's hidden somewhere in an office and only known by a couple of people. So I think we need to use that information a little bit more. So I would really love to see indices, indexes, or monitoring schemes on a regional or local level. A second thing why I think specifically towards climate we need to have this is I think for climate change, in order to have the right measures taken, we need to have a backing in society, and we need to have like a climate movement. And I think if GDP is not saying much anymore, if GDP is below 2%, are we talking about real growth when we're talking about prediction, or is it noise? Then we need other measures to base our decisions upon. That's one thing. Second, we need to convince people that taking these actions is good for them in the long run. If you can breathe good air, and you will die, you'll have a little bit more years to live, I think that's quite fantastic. I think people will, that's almost unmonetarizing. You cannot monetize life expectancy. So I really think that these type of indices can help develop a movement from the bottom up to support climate action.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I want to open the floor. Are there any viewpoints that you want to highlight or any questions you might have for the panel on this statement, that local and regional level? Yeah, over there. Can you say very shortly your name and affiliation, and keep your question or statement short, please?
Okay, so the name and short question. My name is Mladen Domazet. I'm from the Institute for Political Ecology in Zagreb. Are you not worried that this is a mitigating strategy by focusing on the correct indicators on the local that gets the true global political actors, which are the nation states, and they're the only ones represented in the agreements like Paris Agreement, and that forum off the hook of actually developing the correct degrowth indicators to get us to the climate restorative society of the 21st century? Thanks.
Okay. Who likes to take up that question? Ulla?
Well, no, absolutely not. As I started saying, that it's an also, I think we do need, of course, the national indicators, which we do have and which we do develop and select so that we can exactly, as I said, compare and then stand up to our international obligations. And I was just thinking that I very much liked Brile's example of indicators because of a lot of our goals, because right now in Finland, as we heard, our climate goals are quite well, very, very demanding to be carbon neutral by 2035, and to we're going to cut our transport emissions by half from what was it, from 2005 level, but in 10 years we're going to do that. So I very much like the idea that instead, because the goals are very clear that we are cutting emissions, so of course the indicator easily is the emissions, And I very much like this idea that, because of course we often say that you get what you measure, so in that ways we need to be measuring more of those things that we want to also achieve, which is better mobility. So I like that thinking, and again, to have that on the regional level is important because the regions are so different, especially when it comes to access. It's easier in the Helsinki region. You see, we have trams, metros, it's easily to maybe make people more mobile in other ways, but how to do that in the countryside is a question.
Okay, thank you. Atte, you also want to jump in?
Yeah, a quick comment. Excellent comments in the start about the legitimacy of the local indicators. But I do see this risk, especially since all the technically, or basically, I think organizations like municipalities, cities, they tend to try to look as good as they can. So they tend to pick up indicators that make them look good. So there really needs to be a connection with the kind of the higher level indicators as well when you're measuring stuff happening on the local. And it also has to be produced objectively, and so that there's like transparency on what the data actually is. So I do think there's clearly a risk in this type of, if you just put on the local lenses and then we start maybe having like scalability issues and measuring stuff that is that doesn't really scale up on the national level, or actually adding up things that are actually double calculating stuff and stuff like this. So yeah, I think that's a risk that should be considered.
Yeah, okay, so this discussion goes into the direction of local, regional level, okay, because it gives meaning to what's happening there, but also there's a need to keep it connected to the higher levels on state, but also European or even international level. Mohammed, very shortly.
Very short, I see another risk that climate policy and taking the right measures is quite complex. Adding other indicators may cause delay, especially for politicians that want to mitigate risk and have as low insecurity as possible. So the problem there is that I can imagine that, for example, in the European Parliament, people will say we want to have a deep impact assessment with all these indicators, which will take 2-3 years before it finishes, and then we don't take any measures in the meantime. So there's a risk that we should also all accept. No, we shouldn't accept, and we should make sure that we both have new indicators and take measures at the same time, because we're not there yet. We're not there. We're not at 50% of CO2 reduction yet. So we can take already big steps and see how it ends up in the local or regional level.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's get further with the procedure and vote. I see already these bars up. I see that there are only 36 people online. Is that correct or not? Okay, so we have already 90 votes. Those who didn't vote, please do it. Yeah, it's maybe, I think we have more than 90 in the room here, but maybe not everybody has such a device that's needed to make the connection. For instance, I'm such a person. But can we show the vote, how it has been done? So this is it? Okay, so there's a big majority on this. 32% strongly agree, 51% agrees, undecided yet 10%, and disagree 7%. So a very big majority for this one. You wanted to say something? Well, it's allowed, of course. Very quickly. Please state your name, affiliation.
Hello, I'm Doreen Grove and I work for Scottish Government, and I also work with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. One of the things I wanted to say is actually I disagree with the statement. It can't be just measuring at one place. It absolutely has to be both. Yeah. Because you have to build trust between the levels of government, and actions happen at all spheres of government, and we have to have them all connected. So while I recognise the problem, I was swithered between what to vote for, because it implies that it's either or, and it isn't, it can't be.
Okay, so you also say, well, it has to be measured on different levels of scale.
But connected.
But connected, yeah, okay. Thanks very much. Okay, over to the next statement. Statement number 2. Beyond GDP monitoring is necessary in order to adopt the far-reaching, integrated policy measures that have to be taken to fundamentally mitigate the socio-economic impacts of climate change. And some explanation, it has become evident that the climate problems we are facing are not solved by simply adjusting business as usual, but instead a societal transformation is needed to achieve the climate goals of the Paris Agreement. It will be difficult to achieve these policy measures if the policy indicators are only based on economic considerations. So we need to use a broader perspective that includes beyond GDP indicators, covering policy domains that are also impacted, such as health, environment, education, labor. So beyond GDP monitoring makes it possible to see the broader picture. So this is more or less in line with what you said, Brille. So maybe it's good to start with you on this.
Hello? Okay. Yeah, so I completely agree with this statement wholeheartedly. I do believe, though, that we need to ensure that the monitoring that we're doing actually then informs policy. So I think an example of what I really think is amazing is Prime Minister Ardern in the New Zealand. Basically, the Department of Treasury is keeping track of multiple well-being indicators. So it's actually enshrined in the Treasury. And then they keep track of human capital, which is everything from teen suicide to homelessness. They keep track of natural capital, economic capital. And then this actually in turn defines the budget. So these indicators are then used to allocate resources at the national level. And so I think that this is sort of and I think it was touched upon earlier, the key thing is that we actually need to define a way that these indicators are used by national governments and local governments. Thank you.
Thank you. Atte.
Thank you. Excellent comment by Brille. I also think that it should, you need, with GDP we have the issue that we seem to have the vision that it needs to grow, and that kind of feeds itself. But with the other indicators, I think it's also about like what are the states, what's the development we're aiming for. So for the narrative to be strong, it also needs debate on what we're aiming for. I would add maybe two comments to the statement which I completely agree on. First is that actually while this beyond GDP monitoring is probably necessary, we can still do a lot within the, let's say, traditional economic monitoring, looking at discount rates, or for example including the environmental adjustment to the total factor productivity, as Brille was presenting. This would already help a lot in balancing kind of the indicators we have at the time. Then another issue is, especially regarding environmental impacts, I think we need to be to understand that we maybe don't measure in all of the dimensions progress as such, but we are actually facing boundaries, thresholds and tipping points, irreversible changes and stuff like that. So there, monitoring needs to be a bit of a different type of action and informing, because then we're not just like adding a number up, but we're facing we need to find out where the risk levels are we do not want to cross, and then avoid those.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, the same procedure. The floor is open for questions or viewpoints or whatever you want to say to the panel, or more in general. Yeah, please state your name and affiliation.
Hello, I'm Leila Reinoud from SDG Watch Europe. I think in this statement that you give is missing the environmental impacts, because climate change is also an environmental issue. But I mean, even in the mitigating policies, going totally into the renewables, etc., also will have environmental impacts. Biomass, lithium for the electric cars. So I think I'm fine to focus on climate change in the discussion, but let's not forget all the rest of the environment, which is impacted with too much focus on climate change.
Yeah, thank you. Good remark. I see one finger here. I go over to you there. Please, your name.
Morning, my name is Angela Ferruzza. I am from the Italian National Statistical Institute. and I would like to share with you Italian experiences because the National Statistical Institute worked for some years on well-being indicators and produced the well-being indicators. Now these well-being indicators are inserted in the Sustainable Development Goals platform in the National Statistical Institute as indicators, but the point is that with a law of 2016, so a law 3 years ago, a selection of these well-being indicators were considered in the annual budget law in Italy. And so this is a real good experience because, for example, one of these indicators is related to GHG emission, for example. But there are 12 indicators that consider health aspects, social and environmental aspects, and at least they are presented with the budget law. Of course, there is a lot to do in the different situation, but this was a point because started from the well-being and national statistical indicator experiences to monitor, put together with the SDGs indicators to monitor and to have effect, if it is possible.
Thank you very much. So I hear Italy does it already. I saw a finger over here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Daniel Möger. I'm from the University of Amsterdam. The one aspect that I wanted to add is we're still talking about a highly technocratic mode of governance, which is about developing refined indicators to capture complex realities. And that seems at odds with the general tendency that we observe in many countries, namely that a politics of the underbelly seems to be taking over and people seem to be losing trust in a form of governance and politics that's highly ordered through, expertise and these sorts of things. And I think if we want support, political support, for governing through any set of numbers, whatever these indicators are, one or a whole dashboard, I think we need to convince citizens that we, as people who are tuned into these discussions, don't just care with our own normative coordinate system about what we think would be good for them, but that we would be genuinely willing to go out, ask people, what is it that you want from your life, then develop an indicator that captures that, even if it's at odds with our probably 99% progressive values in this room, and then say, we'll build a mode of governance, a governance through numbers, that is genuinely interested in making your life better according to the things that you want. Because otherwise, what we are proposing here will continue to be seen by more and more people as an aloft, way out, progressive mode of governance that we think is expertise run, but that they see as purely ideological, and that's going to fail.
Okay, thank you very much for the comment. I take your comment as the last one, and then I go over to the panel just to pick out.
Richard Loud, London School of Economics. I think it's crucial that we take well-being as the guide for the whole of government policy and not just when we're thinking about climate change, partly because it's the right thing to do. But of course, it will be crucial for the climate outcome because it will focus people's attention on the fact that future generations' well-being matters as much as present generations. You get a very high discount rate if you take the GDP approach. You get a much lower one if you think about actual people in the future. That's one point. But the other way I think it will help us is that if you actually look at what are the determinants of well-being, you will find that the physical side of our life is less important than tends to be assumed. So we will find ourselves, if we are focused on well-being, giving more weight to services that help people to lead flourishing and satisfying lives, and less to the physical consumption of goods, which will also be very good for the climate outcome.
Okay, thank you very much. So we had some excellent comments. Who likes to reflect on that? Brille?
Thank you for all the comments. I think with respect to SDG Watch and considering the environmental outcomes, I completely agree. I think that if you have a comprehensive definition of well-being, you'll incorporate the environment and natural capital and biodiversity and land usage, etc. And with respect to sort of perhaps this is an elitist endeavor and we're not necessarily taking into account what citizens actually want. I think that the lack of trust that citizens feel is because our society it has not been looking out for them. I mean, we haven't been keeping track of their needs. We've just been keeping track of unemployment and GDP growth. And I think that if you actually enshrined, as this gentleman said over here, and said, actually, as a government, we want to put well-being as our focus, however you define it, but it's not just material conditions, but also subjective well-being and then services, then I think you would rebuild that trust if your government actually provided for the citizens. And so this to me is, I think that the way that we can rebuild trust is by actually changing the way that we make policies.
Okay, thank you very much, Brile. I think this is the right moment to vote. So let's do that again. It's open probably in your device, so please vote. And they will have a look how many of you are voting. You can already show it? Yeah? Okay. Strongly agree, 68%, agree 26%, undecided 4%, and 2% disagree for different reasons. But there's still voting going on or not? I see some things are changing. Okay, let's go over to the next statement. Statement number 3, also with an eye on the time. I like to keep the time, as I promised in the beginning. Beyond GDP, monitoring should facilitate bottom-up movement through a dialogue about results of the monitoring with societal actors. This also fosters a joint interpretation of results and creates common ground for further action. So this is more into the individual who is participating in this Beyond GDP monitoring. The explanation, all societal actors that are impacted by climate action and its social and economic impact should be involved in the interpretation of the monitoring results and consequently in taking actions or formulating policies. This is the best way to create an enduring climate action that is supported by the people and ensures that no one is left behind. So, the first one I like to invite from the panel is Beata. Actually, I think this is your topic, isn't it?
It is exactly my topic. Thank you. And I'll start with saying something that is maybe not well seen, but fighting climate change is an abstract idea for many people. That's why the untrust. People don't get it. They cannot imagine saving the planet. I can tell you that's at the edge of the European Union, somewhere in the east of Poland, close to the Belarusian border or Ukrainian. It's an abstract. People simply do not understand why they have to choose it as a priority, having so many other problems that are much more realistic. So I would say that the first is the dialogue. The first is the knowledge, the education, the effort that the government, central government, local government should put into educating people and talking to them, convincing them, then by consequence making them involved and making them feeling the owners of the topic. And it's not an easy task, and you cannot do it just overnight. You have to really pay a lot of time and effort to take people on board. The thing is how you do it. You have to use the proper language. You have to find the words that make the abstract idea into the reality. And this is exactly what you are doing with the well-being concept. That's my great belief. That when you explain to people that, okay, saving the planet is important, but it's like a side effect. What's more important is your health issue. What's more important is the natural environment that you're living in, the clean water and clean air that you have access to. And by the way, by choosing to behave a bit differently, because of your values, because of your morality, as it was mentioned, you are actually changing the world from the bottom. And I really think that the local governments are those to do that. Local leaders, those who are involved in their local communities, social entrepreneurs, people who are active in their neighborhoods. These are the people of change, seriously. And then I truly believe that we are going to change this climate change fighting from the hobby of the rich, as I call it, to the lifestyle of all.
Thank you very much, Beata. Ulla, you are the next one.
Thank you. Yes, I also agree with this statement here. And I think it's especially in this climate action, it's very crucial that we engage people in planning and providing and having them to be, of course, part of the solution and not the problem. And I think it's especially serious here because there is not only may it be abstract to some people, but we also have people being very anxious, and there is a fear of the climate action that needs to be done because there is maybe not enough information. When we talk about specifically indicators, I think that we've had some ways of engaging people in dialogue when we develop and choose indicators, and actually you often see I see more interest in participating in developing the indicators than actually using the indicators afterwards. So I think we've really kind of left it halfway there when we involve both policymakers and NGOs and then the society at large when we develop the indicators. I think it's good because then when you do it at that stage, you do get more interest maybe in using afterwards, but I certainly think we need to build more ways of actually interpreting the results together. The national sustainable development indicators in Finland, there we actually have a bit of that practice at the moment because the national indicators that we have in Finland, we run them at the Prime Minister's office, but they are owned by the National Commission for the Sustainable Development, so it's owned by a much larger society than just the government. And those indicators are actually, they're out in the web, and anyone can comment and discuss those indicators, what they mean, and so there's a little bit of that practice already there. And then on a yearly basis, we have this State of Sustainable Development in Finland, where we actually use those indicators. And last year we had a citizen panel or expert panel about, I think, 2,000 people who actually, they were asked to go through every single indicator and read also the expert interpretation. I hate that word. And I can never pronounce it. But anyway, I was part of the panel too, so we need to read all those. And then we said that whether the indicator is telling, are we at the state is good and is the development good? And then we got a quite nice picture of how 2,000 citizens or experts saw those indicators. So we have some elements of that engaging the society at large at looking at those at the results that we have, but we should definitely have more of that. That would make a difference.
Okay, thank you very much, Ulla. So again, floor is yours. Who likes to ask a question or make a comment? I see two persons over there.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Douwe Truijens. I work at Energy Transition Studies at TNO in the Netherlands. My comment or question is that there's a risk in this statement when it comes to participation and bottom-up participation. This seems to be like a modern time buzzword because we think that bottom-up participation equals representation. But I think it's important to realize, which is also in line with Beata's comment, that people live in different realities in this society. And this idea of bottom-up participation reflects basically a utopia of the Greek city-state where everyone has the same ability to be concerned with small-scale issues. So I think that we should avoid the risk of also equaling participation with a sense of responsibility and accountability, saying that if a policy outcome is not in line with your interest, then you should have participated more, because there's whole layers of society that are just concerned with getting by and just making ends meet, and that cannot be concerned or be even required to really participate to this extent on global issues. So I think the statement 1 and 2 combined should already lead to indicators that make sure that even though at a personal level you cannot participate, your interests beyond GDP are still represented in policy.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Can you hand over the talking stick to your neighbor? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Martin Eriksson. I'm the network manager of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network in Northern Europe. I thought your comment was very interesting, and of course I agree we need sort of a bottom-up movement, and we need to use concise and very pedagogical language. But there might be even harder than that, I think, because there's a lot of, if we talk about sustainability, climate and sustainability, there's multiple trade-offs here, and there's not always a win-win situation. So people might actually have to sacrifice some things, right? So how, would you like to expand a bit on that? How do we explain those things?
To whom are you asking that? To Beata?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I shall do it, yeah. I think it's a matter of giving the choice. If you are fair to your interlocutors, and you have even a small community, small town, anywhere in Europe, and you just, you are just fair to them. You are saying, okay, these are the options on the table. This is up to you, what you would prefer, or how would you like to get there. It's like with each and every policy. Climate policy is just broader, I would say, and touching each and every aspect of our lives. The whole idea, as I understood, if I understood the presentation that Brille was giving, is that we have a bunch of indicators now completing each other. We have a bunch of aspects that should be included in the policies we are making. And this is exactly, just to go back for the comments of our colleague from Croatia, the first one, to give you the global context, what happened in Paris was the huge change of the philosophy behind the treaty. It was not the top-down anymore, but the top-down was somehow completed with the bottom-up. And this was, so that's the global context. All over the world, people understand that it is not only about the policies made by governments at the international level, but it is also about touching the local communities who can contribute if they are given a choice. And I truly believe that people will contribute if given a choice. It's simply the discussion, the dialogue, the clearing out the ideas. Let people discuss. They would make a choice. Seriously, it's not that easy. Just to make it trivial that if you can afford it, you are the supporter of the climate change policy. It's not like that. It's not about money at the end. Money is a good mean of support, but it's not the purpose of it. So I really believe that people have values and they want to improve their own lives. They just need to be given a choice.
Mohammed, you were also waving?
Yeah.
Keep it short.
I'll try to keep it short. Normally in Parliament we have 1 minute, so I'm making use of this position now. I think we have to tell the real story. I mean, having no one left behind, I don't think we can... it's a nice dream, but I think we will disappoint a lot of people. When we want to make our economy greener, this means that current industries will have to change. This will mean that some people will lose their jobs. This will mean, especially in the transition, more costs have to be made. Let's be honest to the people and tell them this honest reality, basically. I think people in the Netherlands, we had a discussion that we said that making our electricity green will save us money, and then at the same time that the government increased energy taxes, and many people saw that their bill was increased by 300 to 600 euros a year. They were disappointed. They said, come on, how can I go green when my bank account is red? I do not know whether this is good English, but this is especially how we say it. So going green while being in the red numbers is complicated. So, but by telling them, by identifying the losers, or sectors that will lose, by telling them the real story, we can help them in that transition. But leaving no one behind, that will be problematic. We have to change, and we have to disrupt the way we produce nowadays, which means losers and winners, hopefully. And if we take the decisions soon enough, then we can decrease maybe the damage for these people that are left behind.
Okay, thank you very much. You had a last point, yeah?
I'm sorry to hog the mic again, but really briefly. Out of the 7 billion people on the planet, at least 2 are living in climate restorative ways, and some of those, less than perhaps in the south, are in Europe and likely at the Belarusian border in Poland, except if they're working directly in the coal mine. And why don't we admit that it's the redistribution and it's the inequality that's driving a lot of our climate footprint? So the practice of the richest and then the aspiration of those who are not rich to attain that kind of both lifestyle and security. So perhaps that's the way to start rather than re-educating.
Okay, thank you very much for the comments. Now the floor is open for the voting again. So please go to that screen.io if you were not there yet. Vote on this statement. You have heard a diversity of views. No, you cannot see it yet, but I will read it. No problem. How far are we? Can we show it? Yeah, okay. Very important, 47%. Important, 30%. Fairly important, 21%. Slightly important, 33%. And not important is 1%. Okay, thanks very much. So this is, we have still the bias towards the positive part, the important and very important. That's what I see. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Then statement number 4. The EU should request countries to report the beyond GDP monitoring results and the actions they will take based on the monitoring in the national energy and climate plans. The countries, the member states of the European Union are obliged to make such climate plans each year. So, and show their progress in the sense of how much measures did they take, how much greenhouse gases will be abated or have been abated, and this is about how to also involve beyond GDP indicators in that. This is more a kind of a request to the European Union in a very concrete matter. Maybe we should do this. Who can I ask? Mohammed, I start with you.
Let me start by, let me change it. I disagree. Let's see whether we can convince people to vote on disagree this time. And I can tell you why. Because I don't think the national energy and climate plans are the right place to do this. I think we should be more ambitious. Let's do this in the European semester. Let's make this part of our economic, ecological thinking. And I think the national energy and climate plans, I've been through most of them. Because before I was becoming a member of parliament, there was a tender that I had to write, so I was forced to read through all of them. They're not that great, to be honest. A lot of wishful thinking, and I don't think they have a serious position yet within this process of policy making and decision making at the European context. And if we include these well-being indicators in the European semester, and I've talked to some people of the Commission, and I think they are trying to copy the Italian BES indicators within the economic semester. I think that's a better place to do it. I think it will have much more impact if we do it there, and it's easier to check on whether countries are on the right track. instead of these national energy and climate plans that they develop once a year or they write down once a year, and the quality level between the countries is too high. And within the semester we have a fixed framework. It's taken up very seriously, it's discussed and debated within the parliament. That's the right place, so that's why I'm telling you, vote disagree, let's go for the economic semester.
Okay. Yeah, you like to win. I know. I recognize that. Yeah, Brille, the next one.
Yeah. So I do agree with you that I think that there's value in enshrining this in sort of a more formalized way with the economy, but I don't fully agree, because I do think that there, as we've already said, that there will be consequences from decarbonizing and doing the energy transition, and I think that we could have a Gilets jaunes instance if we don't do this monitoring in our climate and energy plans. I think we need both. I'm going to take a diplomatic stance on this. And I think also the other point is that I think it touches on sort of the first statement about sort of how we make this monitoring meaningful. Do we do something like the Atlas in Netherlands? I think this is quite an interesting idea. And then also sort of just how you bring that up to the national level. So yes, I think it does have a role in these plans.
Okay. I see already somebody waving over there.
Thank you. Jonathan Bart from the Zoe Institute for Future Fit Economies. I just wanted to comment on this idea of integrating in the European semester. So when we talk to the Commission about exactly that proposal, I think most of people will usually answer, yeah, basically we already have these indicators integrated in the semester. So there is reporting on green, on carbon emissions, there's reporting on resource extraction. Of course, there are some indicators missing. I would totally agree with that. But usually, the problem is not about what we are measuring. The problem is where are the teeth of the European semester. And the teeth are the deficit rule, the teeth are about debt and all these kinds of things, you know that. So I think it's not sufficient to just say, okay, we have to integrate it, because then, of course, countries will just report further data, but not just their policies, because we have to talk about different policies. We don't have to only talk about different indicators. I think that's where this discussion is also lacking at the moment. And then you would also have to give teeth to these other indicators in the European semester. I would totally agree with that. But I think I wouldn't say that it's sufficient to just include indicators in the semester.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I have a quick response, Adrian, or not? This is very interesting.
While you are walking towards the lady, very shortly.
Well, of course, I agree. Yeah? We have to look at what measures are we going to take. For example, the European Parliament has just wrote down a motion for resolution where we said that 40% of our agri and regional budget should go to climate-related or environment-related policies within the specific budgets. And then the Commission will say, okay, we will do 30%, and then we'll have a new number. Now it's, I think, 20%, so we'll end up with 30% probably. I hope more, but let's say it's 30%. Then within the economic semester, you have to see what policies are going to be taken to reach this target. So I fully agree. It's not about only showing data on different indicators. It's checking whether the policies that we try to develop, how they add up towards these well-being indicators. And that's much more than only GDP. And that's what I would like to see for the economic semester, or European semester, sorry.
Okay, thank you. You had the question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's actually more a comment to sort of feed into this, this discussion. My name's Tanya Cox, and I'm the director of Concord. I actually happen to completely agree with Mohammed. I would disagree with this statement because, in actual fact, the European semester is one of the most important economic processes that the EU has for its member states. And yes, it does have teeth. The key thing is to make it have teeth across the range of indicators that are measured, so that we don't prioritize only the economic ones, but also the social and the environmental, and à la limite also the governance ones could become equally important and all have teeth, because they're also important if we're going to try and meet these sustainable development goals. And I think that why I would vote disagree is also because I would want to encourage the EU to be doing the right thing, because we know that there are already conversations behind the scenes on changing the European semester to try to increase the degree of well-being in the indicators, across the range of indicators. We even have a commissioner with a title, An Economy That Works for the People now. Sorry, I come from the EU bubble, so I know a little bit about this. But this is this is what we want. This is the title of the man has to then link to the work that he's going to be doing, and we can't go backwards, we have to go forwards now. So I would thoroughly agree with Mohammed.
Okay, thank you very much. Mohammed has amended the statement a little bit. I saw a wave over here. Yeah? Yeah, the gentleman over here. And you also want to have it after? Yeah? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Patrick Tembrink of the European Environmental Bureau and NGO Network. I'd just like to build on the European semester. One thing is integrating the indicators. The other thing is making sure those policies have teeth. But how strong you push with the teeth and crunch with the teeth depends on the overarching philosophy of the European semester. So it's now focused on macroeconomics, and should we not transform the semester from a European and from a growth and stability pact to a well-being and sustainability pact? I mean, this requires treaty change, so but it will actually make a huge difference in the end. Is this something we should go for?
Okay, thank you. And the last one over there, yeah?
Hello everyone, my name is Gaurav Das. I work as a senior expert in product development and sustainability in a Finnish clean tech company based in Turku. So I'm going to make a sort of a comment, and it's based on all the previous discussions we have and also from the World Circular Economy Forum which I attended. So I would like to say that yes, the EU and the national policymakers, they are proposing policies and for industries, for people and all that. But you should understand that at the end of the day, it's the people who would be using, who are the actors at the grassroots level. So I would say that, has there been a discussion about green jobs? So what I would like to say is that have this metric, like how many green jobs have been created in EU countries or communities, and to incentivize people or to incentivize the most talented people to get those green jobs who can make difference, give them income tax benefits. In that way you will have the best and the brightest from all the countries, and EU do those jobs. And the other companies who will not have green jobs, I mean, they would have the same so the people who would have green jobs, they will have like a lesser income tax, which means everybody will go there. And then at the end of the day, like the polluting companies or the polluting businesses, they would have, well, not the best talent. So in that way, it would gradually weed out like the non-green businesses and the non-green, let's say, ecosystem. So has there been any discussions about it, or what do the experts think?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of twist you also have in mind, but maybe Atte, you
just
very
a quick,
shortly.
Quick comment. First, I would say I'm completely with Team Mohammed here, but here the issue I think you're raising is a complex one in regarding how you define a green job. I think if you followed the debate on the taxonomy and sustainable financing, for example, in the EU, it's not a very clear. You can end up doing like policies that do not scale up for the right goals on the system level. So that's the issue. Like definition of a green job here is a difficult one.
Okay. I like to finish it with that. Let's vote again, also with an eye on the time. So, are we there to show it, or 60 votes? Yeah, you want to see if it disagree or not, and then you think you're won. But I have no idea. Yeah, let's see. Okay. There were no disagree. Important. Yeah, but let me say this: if you voted for important, then somehow it should be taken up in the system of the EU, I would say. And we have noted that you said, well, it could also be, there's some support specifically for Mohammed for that semester thing. So we will state it in that way. Okay, there is also slightly important, there's a big diversity on this one, I would say. For the next one, and with an eye on the time, because we are close to the end, we have still a quarter of an hour, I would like to do the last statement and turn it around, do it reversely. So you start with voting, and you can vote on 3 things at the same time. Taima, are we ready for that? I know that it's a little bit of improvisation from my side, but I think it's nice to do it, to try to do it in this way. At least we have the votes. So you can vote now on 3 statements. And the 3 statements are: the monitoring of the transformation processes towards a climate-neutral society should be monitored in a fact-based manner. There is a tailor to specific regional and local context. That means that it should also be in on a fact-based manner on the national member state level, of course. So it's more about that fact-based manner. The second one is about beyond GDP monitoring can provide this. And the last one is a broader well-being lens helps to achieve a fair and just energy transitions in terms of inclusiveness and a fair division of wealth while avoiding energy poverty. So please vote on all 3, and then we will have the debate afterwards. We also have a moment of silence and contemplation, don't we? That's always good. 80 votes. Let's do it with 80 votes then. Can we show them? So probably, I hope we can see them all 3, yeah? So the monitoring of the transformation, yeah, that's, sorry for the for the panel. The monitoring of transformation process towards a climate-neutral society should be monitored in a fact-based manner. Strongly agree is 48% now, agree 28%, so a big majority is for that. Beyond GDP monitoring can provide that. That's a little bit more unclear. So there is something to do over that. Strongly agree 15%, 14%, agree 46%, undecided 34%, and it changes while I'm reading it. A broader well-being lens helps to achieve a fair and just energy transition, etc. Strongly agree 45% and agree 38%. So that's a big majority. We can keep it open that people still can vote or change or whatever. Then let's see what happens here, but probably it will not change dramatically. Can I ask Beata maybe to very shortly comment on it?
I do strongly agree with the statement that fact-based monitoring should be provided to each and every level. I believe that the EU is so rich with its diversity, but this diversity is a challenge. And this challenge requires leadership from the politicians. Not everybody is so lucky to have Mohammed in his country. So sometimes it happens that the central government is not really challenging the reality enough. So then you need local leaders as well, and you have to be able to reach out for regular people, which brings as well this kind of a competition and, in a good sense, fairness of treatment in between us Europeans. Just to give you I think, good example with the air quality. Since we have these huge maps of Europe with green and red dots, and all of the red dots are somehow accumulated at the Polish territory, it has really became a topic in Poland, and people are discussing why we have such bad quality conditions, and the other Europeans are enjoying much better. And what is the issue? And then, of course, a completely different angle of the discussion of the energy sector is a consequence. But this is exactly how it should be done. We should get the people with the facts, with the precise message, and then we have a chance to convince them, and then we have the chance to unlock the potential that the individuals are having. And I do strongly believe, the most strongly I believe in the third statement, that really it's a complex issue. And the biggest challenge we have in Europe now is to how apply various indicators and when creating policies that would be suitable to each and every corner of the EU.
Okay, thank you very much. Atte, can I have your view on this?
Yeah, sure. I'm a friend of facts, so definitely fact-based manner sounds good. But keeping in mind maybe two things. One is that when we measure stuff happening in our society and environment, when we're closer to the natural sciences realm, defining a fact and measuring a fact, producing information there is clearer than from when we're looking at societal changes, then like measuring phenomena and defining facts a bit trickier. And then we also have to admit that we have the problem in the society at the moment that facts don't really sell well, but fake stuff even sells better. So it like relying on rational decision making and like societal movement might not be fruitful. You can't rely only on that one. Beyond GDP monitoring can provide this. Yeah, it may provide this used well. And then there's the statement about broader well-being lens to achieve a fair and just energy transition. Definitely, that's what we've been talking a bit around here already. But then I would also point out that regarding energy, we kind of technically, we know we need to decarbonize our energy economy, and that's a fact in a sense. And then looking at this broader well-being lens helps then to implement this kind of, let's say, technical thing we have to do in a way that it's as fair and just as possible. So it goes first with the limitations we have. We need to drastically reduce our carbon emissions and other environmental impacts, and then we need to kind of make out policies that we get people on board and which are fair and just.
Okay, thank you very much. The plenary. I see you waving over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandra Köves. I'm from the Corvinus University of Budapest, Hungary. And whenever I see facts in this context, it really makes me feel that we're still on the sidetrack here. I think we're talking about social constructions, very strong social constructions on what the economy is, what wealth is, what well-being is. These are all social constructions. So when we want to have fact-based manners, I think we're on the wrong track. And also, it's a wonderful idea to have these voting things, but it makes me think that, you know, whenever I see a statement like that, I could argue with every little bit of it from different perspectives. And I think that's how we think of the whole process. You know, that some experts come up with statements and then the whole society should kind of decide on that. But I think the crisis of representative democracy shows that we should think completely differently. We should build these statements from the bottom up, but in deliberative manners, real deliberative manners, and then we can come up with statements like that. So fact-based or social construction, I think that's important.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Yeah, over here, and then you over there.
Hello, my name is Matt Meyer from the Economy for the Common Good. I would like to just add to that, and also what the gentleman said from the University of Amsterdam, that indicators need to be democratically established, because this top-down approach, you will not get the people behind it. And like it was mentioned, Gilets Jaunes is one example of that. But also there seems to be an emphasis on measuring indicators on a local authority, regional and governmental level, and then having a policy approach on how to bring that into the economy. But the economy itself needs to live on new indicators. We mentioned how GDP is a meaningless indicator. I think it was Pavel who said, we can tell the economy what we want from it. If we ask the economy for GDP, it will deliver GDP, it will deliver money. If we ask the economy for something else, for well-being indicators, if we measure that within companies and bake that into the economic thinking, we will get something different. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A last point over there.
Yes, good morning. My name is Helene Gerding. I'm from the Danish 92 Group, which is a Danish civil society coalition network. My main concern in these things, when you always talk about the regionalization and the local monitoring, local context monitoring, is that we lose track of our global footprint and our global impact. So if I voted undecided or partly agree or not really decided, all these things, it's always because as good as it is to keep local point of view, it is absolutely something that we need to keep in mind, that we do have, especially here in the Nordic countries, the northern part of Europe, a very, very important global impact that must absolutely be included. So that's just a point I think we also need to remember. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. With an eye on the time, we have 4 minutes left, and I would like to close off this session. I think although this is maybe not the best way of inviting you to the discussion, in the sense of that you have to vote at a certain moment on statements, it gives also a good way of interacting with each other and to hear your comments. So I was very glad to hear all your comments on these statements. If I am right, I see that there's a lot of agreement on this beyond GDP thinking and how to deal with it in the energy transition. But the proof of the pudding is always in the eating. I've heard your comments on how to keep it more connected, in the sense of not only on the local level, but also on the higher levels of the member states, the EU, and even worldwide. That somehow it should be a connected process. And on the other hand, the advocacy for the smaller things, to go very close to where people matter, what they do, where their interests are in, or what their abilities are. I think that's also something which is very, very important. What we will do with the outcomes of this session, because we have the votes, that's also a kind of a nice way of dealing with it, is that we will make a report of it. We will put the votes in it and make a kind of a statement of it, because there's a kind of line in it that we brought into the argumentation. And we will bring that forward to the conference, but also to other areas, to the European Union. Also through our DEETS project, we have some influence on the research that should be done on this, so we will also try to translate it into research recommendations at the end. So I really like to thank the organization of giving us the opportunity to do this. I like to thank the people in the back and my colleague Timon, who was there for all these technical things. I like to thank the panel for their inspiring comments, I would say, and I also like to thank you very much for your participation and for being here. So I like to give a big round of applause to everyone here in this room. And thank you very much. And while I'm going back to my seat and I invite the panel to go back to their seats, I want to give the word to Elena.
Yes, thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you, panelists, and thank you for you all for your active participation. This was really interesting discussion, and now this was the open part of the Beyond Growth conference. So those of you who have just come for this seminar, I apologize that now from now on this will be. We will continue with those people who have registered for the whole 2-day conference. But yeah, for next we have about, well, I would say a 20 minutes break, and there's, if you didn't have time to register yet, there's time to do it now on the coffee break. And I ask, if possible, I think it would be good for us all to get some air and so if everybody could just leave the room just for some time, so we can prepare everything ready for the next session here in the hall. And we will continue at 12 sharp, and so I would actually suggest that please be on time. Please be here maybe 5 or 10 minutes beforehand rather than late. So we will start with the official opening of the Beyond Growth seminar at 12. Thank you.
for an economy fit for the planet. Gross domestic product is an indicator that measures the size and growth of national economies. Growth is also a political goal. It is considered to create well-being and even to promote environmental sustainability. Despite continued economic growth, the accumulation of wealth falls in the hands of a limited few. The extraction of raw resources in the pursuit of economic growth has driven ecosystems to the brink of destruction. GDP does not measure these and other impacts on ecological sustainability. Now we need indicators that are capable of navigating economies to function within the boundaries set by planet Earth. For example, circular economies can be measured by looking at the amount of recycled nutrients in farming or the amount of reused materials in industry. Economies circulating with fewer natural resources should not detract from the well-being of the people or threaten equality. Even today, many growth economies lose profits by excluding women from the workforce or through corruption, which deteriorates public trust. Capital should be directed towards actions that nurture the common good and protect human rights. We have ample capital in our economies, but without proper indicators for corporate responsibility, feasible targets for investments cannot be pinpointed. All in all, we should measure the things that matter to us. If we are interested in promoting well-being within the planetary boundaries, wouldn't it be the right time to act accordingly?
Dear friends, warm welcome to the Beyond Growth conference and 2 days of that. I know quite many of you already started this morning, but there are also some new people in the room, so welcome to everyone. We have actually 2 full days to discuss about this topic. We can either think it's quite a lot or that it's so little, but still, it's 2 days. If we count together the salaries of all of you for these 2 days, it's quite expensive at least. So let's make sure that we are productive in a way that these things go further as we have planned and as all of you wish. My name is Tuuli Kaskinen. I come from Demos Helsinki think tank, where we work towards more sustainable and more fair and more ecological society. I can see many friends from outside and inside Finland, together with whom I have been working for 20 years with these topics, and I'm super happy that we are able to use these days here. I'm super happy that Fingo have organized these 2 days for us to concentrate on this topic. This is part of the EU presidency program of Finland, which of course gives us a special moment to discuss these topics. The idea is that during these 2 days we aim at pushing forward the discussion on indicators of well-being and sustainability and advancing their use in decision-making at the EU level. And what at the EU level means is, of course, that it happens in the EU, but it happens also in the member states, and that it happens in all the organizations working in EU. So let's take a wide perspective into this topic. We will have inspiring keynote speeches, and in addition to that, we will work together in working groups. And that's actually quite a big part of our conference, so prepare yourself. Now you have an hour to sit down and listen and get information, and then you have almost like a full day this afternoon and tomorrow morning to work hard to make these things to move further in the 5 working groups we will have. And there the idea is to create policy recommendations on how to advance knowledge-based decision-making and what would guarantee well-being that is sustainable now and in the future. So we are expecting quite a lot from those working groups. If and when you are using social media during the event, please use this hashtag #BeyondGrowth. There is already quite a lot of discussion there, so join in there and make sure that this message goes further from here.
And good for you to know is that this event is also streamed. I think in the Twitter feed, at least quite soon, you can find the link. So if you find it important that someone else also hears what Jason Hickel has to say today or what someone else has to say, you can share the link also for the other people that are not here with us today. Like I said, this event is organized by Finnish NGO platform Fingo in partnership with Finland's National Commission on Sustainable Development, and it's part of the EU presidency program. And for all of us to understand why we are here, I'm super happy to invite Elina Mikola, who is the head of the organizing team of this event, to tell us why we are here. Welcome, Elina. Warm applause.
Hey, thank you. You're all warmly welcome to this event. I'm so happy to see that there's so many people here. What comes to our expectations in Fingo, we have been looking forward to these interesting discussions and presentations. But of course, I'm also looking forward to working groups on this afternoon. So as Tuuli already warned you, there will be these thematic working groups where we hope that you will actively participate and bring your ideas and participate to this co-creation process. So I'm really excited to see what comes out from the working groups and what kind of ideas and suggestions and recommendations we will have by tomorrow.
What are the concrete outcomes Fingo wishes to get out of here? Have you already planned what should bring us further from here?
Well, as we have so much expertise here within these walls, we are actually hoping that we will get out some concrete policy recommendations that we can push forward in our advocacy work in Fingo and with also in our networks. And tomorrow we will have the State Secretary from Raimo Rooma from Finnish Prime Minister's office visiting us, and we will be presenting him a set of recommendations produced by us here. And these recommendations will also be introduced, for example, at the European Sustainable Development Network conference just in a couple of days from now.
So there are some further steps, and at the same time I think we should remember where we are coming from. There is loads and loads of work that has been done before this, so we should get us a bit further during these 2 days. What is your main message for the participants? What should they concentrate on?
Well, I hope that you will enjoy this event, but I also hope that because we didn't want to organize a traditional conference where people come mostly to sit down and listen. We wanted to organize a co-creation conference. So I hope that you will find yourself a creative mindset and discuss with people and find new contacts and bring out the ideas. Let's see what comes out of this.
Thank you very much, Elina. This is our plan now. Thank you. Applause for Elina. I would kind of give us one advice for these 2 days, which is that at the same time, our aim is to really change the world, which is, as we know, huge work, and there are always this and that and that and that and that and that should be changed to make this happen. And at the same time, we are living in times when it's like Financial Times who just wrote that capitalism is broken in some ways. And of course, that's not enough to say that, but there are a lot of seeds of this change that we can see around us. So let's try to keep these both ends, the big change that is needed, our huge will to change the whole world, which is of course a long-term process where we know that next year is not where we will not be there. We don't have all the indicators we would like to have and all of that, but we have to have this vision. And at the same time, there are these seeds and steps, and actually someone is using some indicators and they might be not the perfect ones yet, but there they are and all of that. So let's not forget any of these ends of the discussion. So let's try to keep us in very practical sense, like what should be done next, and at the same time on the very visionary level. If we are able to do that, our recommendations by tomorrow afternoon will be what they probably should be. The program for today is such that we will start with opening words, then we have a keynote by Jason Hickel, then we have lunch and a lot of networking discussions around that. However, it's only 45 minutes, so make sure you keep your pace, because then we come back and actually start this working group work. We first have a look at what we should do together, and then we go to the working groups. And then this afternoon, this evening, we will meet at cocktails after 5 o'clock. That's the plan for today. But now, I'm very happy to invite someone who has also been working with this topic for a long time, and at the moment has quite an important role to play in Finnish governance. State Secretary Saila Ruth comes from the Finnish Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, and she has been preparing as part of the government this economy of well-being for being one of the main themes of Finnish EU presidency. And probably you know that the Finnish government program that was created last spring starts with the world climate change, and there is huge amount of ideas of how the governance work should be reorganized in a way that our society goes towards the sustainable development goals and that topic. At the same time, yeah, there have been already some criticism against our government to say that they are not far enough yet, which is of course true. No one of us is far enough. They have only been working for half a year now, so let's not blame them too much, but let's warmly welcome Saila Ruth, State Secretary from Ministry of Social Affairs and Health. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tuuli. And thank you for the organizers. Thank you, Fingo. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to be here. And I want to express my warmest thank you to the organizers. As the presidency of the Council of the European Union, as we heard, Finland wants to make an impact on the EU's future. That future should be socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable. That future, or the slogan for the presidency, states the goal: sustainable Europe, sustainable future. A key priority of Finland's presidency is the EU's global leadership in the climate action. This means committing to climate neutrality by 2050, and for that purpose, we need a long-term strategy in the EU. Measures to fight climate change must be carried out in a socially just way. These measures will have a real impact on all sectors of society. We need to generate sustainable growth and boost employment. An active industrial policy and development of the service sector and the digital economy will help lay the foundation for a new economy for the modern age. Indeed, a competitive and socially inclusive EU is another priority of the presidency. Furthermore, Finland wishes to strengthen common values and the rule of law. We wish to improve and strengthen the EU's rule of law toolbox. Human rights, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law are all values that EU countries commit to as part of membership. Ladies and gentlemen, the priority theme for the social and health sector during our presidency, the economy of well-being, is part of the Finnish presidency program. The economy of well-being is a policy orientation and a governance approach which aims to put people and their well-being at the center of policy and decision-making. With the economy of well-being, Finland wishes to increase understanding in the EU of the mutually reinforcing connections between well-being and economic policies. An effective social and health policy also creates the conditions for sustainable development. Economy of well-being contributes to the implementation of the UN Agenda 2030 and seeks to establish and sustain a virtuous circle in which different dimensions of well-being work together to the benefit of people, society and environment. This calls for a new type of approach to measurement as well. I believe that recognizing the links between well-being, sustainability and inclusiveness gives a greater foundation for our decision-making. Economy of well-being challenges us decision-makers to look beyond GDP and apply multi-objective decision-making in our work. We need to assess how well-being objectives guide the budget goals. Knowledge-based policy-making culture requires the use of an adequate set of high-quality indicators, comprehensive impact assessment, and evaluation of short, medium, and long-term cost effectiveness. Therefore, further collaborative and intensified efforts across sectors are required to improve existing instruments, to better use them, and to build on them for the development of a common approach to measuring the different dimensions of the economy of well-being. Evidence based on reliable data is essential to demonstrate the impact of poverty, health, and other determinants of well-being to economy. Through the use of data, we can identify solutions and take comprehensive actions. The untapped potential, however, is on how and when we use the data. In addressing inequality and safety, for example, we should analyze data to detect early signs of marginalization and target our actions accordingly. Ladies and gentlemen, economy of well-being is a holistic approach, emphasizing the importance of cross-sectoral cooperation and close collaboration with civil society organizations, strengthening knowledge-based policymaking and providing synergies in order to maximize the positive long-term impacts of policy decisions. Last week, the EU member states adopted the Council conclusions on the economy of well-being, agreeing on the basis for their future work on the approach. The Council conclusions that include cross-cutting actions as well as more concrete proposals have been published on the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health website. So we look forward to building on these important messages. With these words, I would like to wish you a very fruitful seminar, very good workshops, and very productive discussions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Saila. She has also been part of the presenting the idea of economy of well-being in OECD workshop, which is a good example of how Finnish government, as part of this EU program, is bringing these ideas further. Putting well-being metrics into policy action is very much the same what we are doing here. Thank you very much, Saila Ruut. Next, we will have a keynote speaker who kind of gives us, I would say, wording for these 2 days. He has written a book called Divide, A Brief Guide to Global Inequality, which is quite something that puts together what we are talking about here, and that's not the only book he has written. He has been working around global inequality, political economy, post-development and ecological economics. and how essential that's regarding the objectives of, these are the essentials regarding the objectives of this event. So exactly the topics we are talking about here. So warm welcome, keynote speaker, Dr. Jason Hickel, an anthropologist, author, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to hope this clicker works here. Excellent. So thank you for the introduction, and it's really an honor for me to be here with you all. I was so excited to hear about this event, and I'm thrilled to be able to participate in it with you. It's such important work that you're doing, and this is one of the few gatherings where people are thinking about the policy of moving beyond GDP and growth objectives. So it's sort of at the forefront of what I'm calling here the ecological revolution that we need to have. So it's very exciting, and thank you for the work you're doing toward this end. What I want to do is I want to begin by setting the stage with this image, which I'm sure many of you have seen. This is the Planetary Boundaries Framework, which has been developed over the past decade or so, which I think is one of the most important innovations in ecological science in the past few decades. And what it shows us is that the crisis we face is not just a crisis of climate change. Okay, this is obviously a key part of the crisis and has captured public attention, but we have a multidimensional ecological crisis that we're facing. Okay, so what we see here is the green zones are places where we're within planetary boundaries. Yellow zones are places where we exceed them, including and red is zones where we are in danger of triggering tipping points in the stability of the Earth system. So we see biogeochemical flows in terms of chemical runoff from industrial farming. Okay, we see biosphere integrity and genetic diversity collapsing. Rates of species extinction, as you know, are in the region of 1,000 times faster than the background rate before the Industrial Revolution. Most ecologists consider mass extinction, which is happening right now, to be at least as severe, if not more severe, an existential threat as climate change, not just to Earth system, but also to the stability of human civilization. Land system change, which includes soil depletion due to industrial farming. You know, we know that 40% of topsoils around the world are degraded due to intensive industrial extractivism from the lands, and we only have about 60 years of harvest left in topsoils if we continue at our present rate of depletion. Deforestation is another massive one. Half of our tropical forests have been decimated over the past 50 years, or since 1950. And on our present course, we're on a trajectory to see the other half of our mature tropical forests erased from the planet by the middle of the century. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that ecologists have found a way to summarize this impact in a single figure, which we refer to as material footprint. I don't know if this is going to work. Suddenly it stops. Let's see, material footprint. What material footprint does is it adds up all of the material stuff that nations extract and produce and consume every year into a single indicator in tonnage. And what we see here in this graph is that humanity now consumes in the region of about 90 billion tons of material stuff per year, and that's everything from fish to forests, minerals to metals, petroleum to plastics, everything. Okay. The red line is what ecologists say is a sustainable level of material extraction and consumption. We breached that level in about 1997, and the rate of extraction and consumption of material stuff has actually accelerated since then, rather than slowed down. And we can also see how this is really a problem. Oh, there we go. We can also see how this is very tightly linked to GDP growth, right? So what we see here is the gray line is GDP since 1990, and the black line is material footprint since 1990. And what we see is that, during this very period, pundits were telling us that there was going to be a dramatic decoupling, right, of GDP from material throughput as we switch over to a services-based economy and so on. Well, it turns out that decoupling has not happened. On the contrary, the opposite has happened. Material use is rising at a faster rate than GDP. There's been a rematerialization of the global economy, not a dematerialization. There's been a recoupling, not a decoupling. Now, given the relationship between GDP and material throughput, right, it stands to reason that the biggest, the most impactful parties here are rich nations. In fact, virtually all of the of the ecological overshoot that we're seeing in terms of material extraction and use comes from high-income nations. So what this graph shows us is material footprint per capita by different income groups. Low income on the left here, high income on the right there. Blue is 1990, orange is 2008 data. And what we see is in poorer countries of the world, people consume in the region of 2 to 3, maybe 4 tons of stuff per capita per year. In high-income nations, it's in the region of 28 to 30 material tons of stuff per person per year. There's the per capita planetary boundary, the red line. So we can see that in rich nations, we're overshooting ecological boundaries by about 4 times over, okay? This is an important fact. If all of us in rich nations consumed the same amount as everyone else in the rest of the world, we would not be in a position of ecological overshoot at all. There would be 0 ecological overshoot, okay? Literally all of the ecological overshoot and the consequences that we're seeing as a result of that are being driven by overconsumption in high-income nations. This is a stunning but important fact. I know that, oh no, I have no control over these slides now, so. Back, please. Okay, I know that you're curious to see where Finland fits on this. And we have, oh, I now have control again. We have Finland here. This is 2008 data. What we see is that Finland, despite its image as a kind of ecologically sustainable country, has an extremely high material footprint, about 40 material tons of stuff per person per year, okay? Now, of course, the other key dimension, I'm clicking, of ecological breakdown is climate change. And what we see here is the black line showing historical emissions. If we continue on our existing business as usual trajectory, that's the orange line, we're headed for over 4 degrees of global warming by the end of the century, okay? Scientists are clear that this level of global warming is incompatible with human civilization, with organized human civilization as we know it. Now, the blue line represents the commitments that nations have made under the Paris Agreements, which is supposed to be for 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, okay? All of the national plans, when you add them up, lead us to over 3 degrees of global warming by the end of the century, which again, scientists are very clear is incompatible with continuation of organized human civilization as we know it. Why is that? What explains this discrepancy? The reason is that continued economic growth through the rest of the century is effectively outstripping the gains that we project to be made due to efficiency improvements and decarbonization, okay? Growth is basically eating the gains that we're making through decarbonization, and that's not a tenable trajectory. What is a tenable trajectory? Comes from the IPCC reports in 2018. I don't know how many of you have seen this image, but this is the headline image that they ran with, showing historical emissions here and the trajectory that the world needs to achieve to stay under 1.5 or 2 degrees, okay, which means getting to 0 by the middle of the century. Now, when I show this graph to my students, there are gasps in the room, because what they realize here is that this represents nothing more than a fundamental, dramatic, and very rapid shift of direction of the entire civilization, okay? This is a kind of all hands on deck situation. Now, for rich countries, given their historical responsibility for emissions, the emissions reductions have to be much steeper, reaching 0 at about 2030 to be consistent with the principles of fair shares and equity. Okay, so this is remarkable. We've built up a civilization based on fossil fuels over the past 200 plus years, and now we have to completely transform it to an entirely new energy system in the span of only about 30 or less. Okay, I mean, it's impossible to overstate the scale of this task. So the question then becomes, is it possible to do this? And the answer is, theoretically, yes, it is possible. And we can do it with a rapid rollout of renewable energy to eliminate emissions from fossil fuels, okay? We all know this. We can do it with reforestation, soil regeneration, a switch to beef-free diets and so on to end net emissions from land use. And we can do it by switching to next-generation industrial processes to cut emissions from cement, steel, and plastic, okay, which produce emissions regardless of the fuel that they consume, right? And this is possible to achieve with massive public investments, with government subsidies for renewable energies, with carbon taxes, with guided finance, and so on, under the guise of what some people are calling the Green New Deal, but what here in Finland is referred to as ecological reconstruction. this is possible to achieve, and that is the good news. Now, the difficult question is it possible to achieve this rapid transition while at the same time growing the global economy? This is really the million-dollar question. Now, just to set the stage here, so sorry, the slides are not working out very well. Right now, the global economy is growing at normal rates of about 3% per year. Now, that doesn't sound like very much because we're used to thinking of growth in quite linear terms. It seems like a small increments. But in fact, it's an exponential figure, which means that by the middle of the century, at a 3% growth rate, the size of the global economy will nearly triple. Okay? So the question becomes, is it possible to decarbonize the entire global economy while at the same time nearly tripling its size in the same period? And tripling the size of the global economy also means tripling, well, nearly tripling, significant increases in the energy use that the global economy chews through. Okay? Now, the literature on this is quite clear, including from the IPCC. And the empirical data that we have, which is what I research, is very clear that the answer is no, even under extremely optimistic policy conditions. Okay? And if you're interested in exploring that research, you can see some of my work on my website. Okay? Now, there is one model that we have for achieving rapid emissions reductions consistent with 1.5 degrees in the time that we have left. And that comes from the IPCC, from their report last year. And the way that they demonstrate that it needs to be done is for rich countries to shift to post-growth economic principles. Okay? This is remarkable because this has never really appeared in IPCC reports up until now. Okay? So what they want to see is that rich countries will scale down material production and consumption. Now, what does that have to do with climate change? What it has to do with climate change is that the amount of material stuff that we extract and produce and consume every year takes an enormous amount of energy to do, right? And so by scaling down material throughput, we can scale down our energy use and make it much easier to achieve a rapid transition to renewables in the short time we have left, okay? By effectively shrinking our total energy demands. So this is the sort of pathway the IPCC has laid out for us to follow, okay? Now the good news is this. We know that it's possible to achieve this kind of transition while at the same time improving people's lives, okay? The question becomes how. Now, the crucial point here is this is not about just changing individual behavior, getting people to consume less in their personal lives, switching to LED light bulbs, turning down the refrigerators, whatever it might be. Of course, those kinds of things are important. But what's really at stake here is that we need to organize collectively to create an economy that is fit for the 21st century, that does not require exponential growth just to stay afloat in the first place. Okay? So we need to switch the economic system that we're using. So what does a post-growth economy actually look like? Well, there's a few steps that we can take to get there. Now, and the first one is the one that this conference is specifically focused on addressing. And that is the importance of moving beyond GDP as an indicator of economic progress. Okay, this is absolutely essential because GDP is a fundamentally irrational measure. It's funny, we all take it for granted as sort of normal, as though it's always existed. But it's a relatively new measure invented in the 1930s by an economist named Simon Kuznets. And he himself warns that there's a problem built into GDP, right? It counts the monetary value of everything that we extract and produce and consume, but does not account for the costs associated with those activities. So if you cut down a forest for timber and sell the timber to IKEA, then GDP goes up. But the cost of losing that forest as a sink for carbon or as a home for endangered species is not considered, okay? And so he warned we should never use this as a regular measure of economic progress, and yet that's exactly what we do in virtually every country of the world, okay? So we urgently need to switch to alternative indicators. One option is the genuine progress indicator, which I've plotted here. GPI, which is the gray line, GDP is the darker line. GPI starts with GDP and then subtracts negative social and ecological consequences of growth. And what we see is that the two rose together up until about the mid-1970s. Since then, GDP has continued to rise, while GPI has flattened off and even declines. Now, if we switch our focus to an indicator like the genuine progress indicator, then it incentivizes politicians to pursue the maximization of social and ecological goods and the reduction of social and ecological bads. That's the kind of shift that we have to accomplish. It doesn't have to be GPI. There are many alternative indicators out there that we could use. Or we could have a dashboard approach where we focus on the things that we want to improve and target those directly, rather than just assuming that growing GDP indiscriminately will somehow magically help us accomplish our goals, which it almost never does. Okay? But the crucial thing I want to get across here is that this transition to different measurements alone is fundamentally not enough. Okay? It helps us change our focus, helps us change our discourse, but if our objective is climate stability in the short time we have left, there are other steps we have to take, and these have to be part of our policy package. Okay? And the first one that I would give to you, in addition to switching our measure of progress, would be to actively find ways to scale down material throughput, material production and consumption. Now, it's possible to do this without any negative consequences for people's quality of life. Right? What does that look like? Well, we can ban the practice of planned obsolescence, by which companies, as you well know, whoever owns an Apple anything, knows they're designed to fall apart in about 2 or 3 years. That doesn't have to be the case. Technology is there to make them last much, much longer. We can ban that practice and consign it to the past. Okay? We can legislate for extended warranties on products, and so if your refrigerator or washing machine does break down, you can take it to get it repaired by the manufacturer for an affordable price, thereby extending our product lifespans from, say, 5 to 10 years to 20 to 30 years. Okay? So this allows us to have a significant reduction of the amount of stuff that we consume without any negative impact on the things that we need. Okay? We can introduce a right to repair, which many countries across the EU are beginning to do, so that you can have your gadgets and your washing machines or whatever, your car even, fixed for cheap on the street corner without having to go to the manufacturer for a replacement. We can end food waste, as countries like Italy and France are beginning to do, as South Korea has effectively done in households. Okay? This yields a dramatic reduction in the biomass throughput of an economy. We can reduce single-use packaging in coffee shops and takeaways and so on. I mean, there are many ways we can think about the reduction of that. We can shift from models of ownership to models of usership, so that instead of each of us owning our own private vehicle, we use sharing platforms, or we shift towards more public transportation. Okay? And it doesn't have to be just for cars. There are many other important goods that we can think of sharing through platforms. We can liberate public spaces from advertising, both online and offline, thereby liberating ourselves from the constant pressure and psychological manipulation to consume things that we don't need or even really want. Okay? We can also have a democratic conversation about scaling down specifically destructive and socially less necessary industries. McMansions, SUVs, arms, beef, etc. We can decide as a society what industries are less necessary for our well-being, and have a conversation about reducing those. I mean, this is the practice of real democracy when it comes to economic policy, right? These kinds of principles will allow us to dramatically scale down material throughput, and most people will not even recognize a difference. If anything, they'll feel better about their lives, and will save significant money in the process as well. Now, as we scale down economic activity, it's also really important that we recognize that's going to liberate people from unnecessary labor. And in order to maintain high employment, we have to shorten the working week at the same time. This has to be part of our policy package. So shorten the working week, redistribute necessary labor through the economy more fairly, maintain full employment, at the same time raise the hourly wage with strong living wage policy, or offset wage losses with a universal basic income. Okay? We have strong models to indicate this is a successful approach to maintaining high employment, even as we reduce less necessary material throughput. Okay. We need to prioritize the importance of achieving greater equality. This is also a key point here, right? So our politicians will tell us that we need growth in order to improve people's lives. But that's fundamentally a lie, right? They prefer growth and hoping some of it will trickle down, because that's politically easier for them to do than to redistribute existing resources. But so if growth is an alternative for them to redistribution, we can flip that equation around and say that redistribution is an effective alternative to growth, right? So greater equity can be an antidote to the growth imperative in our economy. We can improve people's lives right now without any growth at all, simply by sharing what we already have more fairly, okay? As part of this package, we also need to focus on investing in public services, perhaps even universal basic services, not just traditionally healthcare and education, but also transportation, internet, et cetera, to ensure that people have access to the goods they need to thrive without needing ever-increasing incomes in order to do so. Maybe that's also public housing, maybe it's rent controls, et cetera. The more we can expand the commons, the less people need private income in order to live good lives. That's an essential piece of a successful ecological economy. Okay. Of course, one of the reasons that our economy has to grow, that we're sort of lashed to the growth imperative, is because there's so much debt sloshing around in our economy. Okay, everything from household debt to state debt to company debt and so on. And because debt comes with interest, and because interest is an exponential function, everyone has to work and produce more and more every year simply to pay it off and to keep our finances stable. We can talk about a debt jubilee, where we have democratic conversations, citizens' assemblies about what debts we can legitimately get rid of, okay? Debts that have already been paid off many times over, debts that are odious, debts that are unpayable, and therefore liberate much of our economy from the imperative of growing unnecessarily to pay down debts typically owed to banks that already have plenty. Okay. And then finally, we need to talk about rethinking shareholder value laws, thereby liberating private companies from the imperative of pursuing growth at all costs, allowing them, freeing them, right, to think about other objectives they might want to achieve, even if it doesn't mean maximizing shareholder value, right? Under many legal systems right now, it's effectively illegal for companies to focus on the environment or to focus on workers at the expense of shareholder value, because they can be sued for doing so. So that needs to change. Okay. Now, the reason I've outlined this is not just because these are interesting. It's because these are policies that are absolutely essential if we're going to be able to reduce our energy demands sufficiently to achieve a rapid transition to renewables. But the benefit of this approach is not just that we do succeed in achieving climate stability, okay, but also that we succeed in removing pressure on all other dimensions of planetary boundaries, all other dimensions of ecological ecosystems, okay? So it's an ecologically coherent approach that thinks beyond just the climate crisis to recognize the multiple dimensions of our crisis. This is an ecologically coherent and scientifically robust approach to our ecological crisis, okay? Now, the good news is that we know that those who say that such a transition is impossible or unfeasible are wrong, right? We know that it is possible. We now have robust post-growth models that demonstrate what a post-growth economy can look like, demonstrate how it can deliver high levels of well-being, improving levels of well-being, at the same time as achieving ecological stability. There's a strong and growing scholarly consensus in favor of this approach. Just last year, 300 scientists from across the European Union got together and signed an open letter to the European Commission calling on them to adopt post-growth principles in economic policy, right? The IPCC, as I've indicated, is also behind this approach and will be increasingly so in the next integrated assessment report. And the important thing also to recognize here is that people actively want a post-growth economy. And this is true in opinion poll after opinion poll. Even in countries as sort of backwards on ecology as the United States, recent opinion polls done by Yale, even in deep Republican states, show that about 70% of respondents would prefer an economy that prioritizes ecology over economic growth. Okay? And these are astonishing results, showing that people are, on a very deep level, ready for a fundamental transformation of the way that our economies work. People realize there's something wrong with an economy that must grow at all costs, regardless of what it does to the planet that we call home. Okay? We know that this approach can deliver us not just an ecologically stable economy, but one that is fundamentally fairer, more generous, right, more intimate, and more exciting than the economy that we have right now. And I think it's essential to the kind of democratically oriented economic transition that we need to focus on. Now, of course, the key thing to understand is that this approach to economics is fundamentally not compatible with the kind of capitalism that we have right now. And to some people, that's scary. But I don't think it should be. I mean, we're a culture that's completely obsessed with innovation, aren't we? We would never look at a smartphone or a painting and say that's the best smartphone or painting that has ever been created and will never be surpassed, okay? We know that we can do better. So why is it that when it comes to the economy, we're so obsessed with maintaining the dogmas of this 19th century model, right? We need a better economy for the 21st century. We know that we can build it, and we're here together to work on making that a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I have a question to ask, and then I think we have many questions from the audience. At the moment, what do you see as the short-term biggest thing we should do? Like, you gave us a huge amount of very thorough, practical information. We know this, and I think most of the prime ministers in Europe, for example, kind of know this. But what's the biggest obstacle that this group of people could fight against?
Well, I mean, you're already focused on the beyond GDP measures, and I think that is a crucial first step. But I guess the point I want to try to get across is that it is simply a first step. And if we only focus on that to the exclusion of rethinking the way the economy works more broadly, then we're setting ourselves up fundamentally for failure. And I'm not in that business. I assume that you're also not in that business. I think we need to be more coherent, which is why I suggest that in addition to focusing on beyond GDP measures, which again I think is the first crucial step, we have to think more broadly about how the economy works. Now, I do think that focusing on beyond GDP is an important way that we can start changing people's minds and changing the conversation, right? Like once we're focused on indicators besides GDP, then it changes the way that politicians operate. It changes the way that incentives work in the economy and in the political system, and so on. So it's kind of a door opener. I see, but it's certainly not the end of the story. And I think that we need to protect ourselves from that easy assumption. Okay.
Easy to agree. Now you all have 2 minutes to discuss with someone next to you, and then put your questions there. That's the way we make sure that the most important questions are there, and Jason has 2 minutes to breath in between. So have a small discussion with someone sitting next to you, tell what was the most important thing, what would you like to ask, and then post your questions here, and you can even rate the questions by other people so we get the most important ones to be on top. Perfect. Make sure you write down also your questions there. You have 30 seconds to go. Thank you very much. You are more than welcome to... Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are moving towards lunch and then we can go on these discussions. Thank you. You are more than welcome to add questions, but let's start. How do we finance public services in the post-growth economy? So if it's not growing, where do we get money for the public services?
Okay, yes, this is a good question. Now, I need to clarify that a post-growth economy is not a dead economy, right? Like imagine if we stay at our existing levels of production and consumption now, existing levels of income, that is a post-growth economy. Okay, so we're still producing revenue every year, and we can use that revenue to fund public services every year, just as we do now. Okay, so and so it's really not it's not as though we're going to have no income. We're still going to have income, and we can still use that to fund public services. Now, and we can even increase the funding of public services by using guided capital, requiring investments from companies over a certain size, by increasing taxes on the rich, et cetera, et cetera. And for some people, this might seem like, okay, like this is not feasible. But the crucial thing to understand is that public services are almost always more cost-effective, cheaper to run than private alternatives, right? And so there's significant savings that can be gained by shifting to public services where there are private alternatives. If you look at the U.S. economy right now, they spend 3 times as much on healthcare every year than the UK does on a per capita basis with the NHS. And so by shifting to public services, we can actually make significant cost savings in terms of the overall economy. So it really should not be scary for us.
Thank you. Then another quite interesting question: how should we work with the very powerful lobbyism for growth and capitalism? How should we handle with those kind of controversial actions?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, right? Because already in the EU, the EU started talking about circular economic principles and so on. There's already a massive backlash by multinational companies in the EU against this rhetoric, or an attempt to appropriate it, like Apple has tried to do, okay? Because what they realize is that the circular economy principles run against the very nature of corporate accumulation, okay? And it's true, we have to watch out for the lobbying, but I think this question actually illustrates an awareness of the fact that our growth-oriented economy is in fact not one that we collectively agree to, right, in terms of our democracy, but rather is one that is effectively imposed on us by interests that are quite different from our own, okay? Corporate lobbyists, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, the solution to this kind of capture is simply democracy. Democracy, to me, is the antidote to the growth imperative. And so the more that we can find ways to kick big money out of politics, to ensure that there are limits on lobbying by corporations and by wealthy individuals, the more control we have over our economic destiny.
Is big capital ready for that? Are they like...
You mean, are they ready to fight us?
They are ready for that. We know they are using loads and loads of money, even to lobby against climate change realities. But are they ready to? Who from that side is ready to change what they're doing? Are they doing something?
I don't know if we can just rely on sort of the goodwill of big companies to make this kind of transition.
Never.
I think that we need to effectively, force them to get on board. And they know that as well. I mean, to the extent that they realize this kind of transition is necessary for our future, they're waiting to be regulated, okay? No one's going to voluntarily do it, because the company that voluntarily does it first is the company that loses. Whereas if regulation is across the board, then they all lose in the same way, and that's fine, right? So I think that's the way we have to think about it, rather than relying on their goodwill.
And then at the same time, last week in California, there was this big conference of impact investing. And in there, they announced that 1/4 of all investments in US are now impact investing. Of course, from our point of view, I think we wouldn't kind of sign that. But at the same time, it means that this kind of thinking is like everyone knows that we cannot just pass it. So we cannot rely on that, but the language is there and people start also on that side to understand a little bit what we are talking about. Yes. Is GDP useful in developing countries or in that part of the world?
It's a good question. It's one that I get all the time. Look, you can't stop people from measuring GDP. So even if you do shift to well-being indicators, economists are still going to measure GDP because GDP is fundamentally an indicator of the well-being of capital. Okay, and so you can't prevent people from measuring it. It's going to happen. That's the first answer, I guess. The second answer, is it a useful indicator for developing countries? I think in some countries it can be. In countries that need, to sort of grow their revenue base in order to invest effectively in healthcare and education and so on, it can be a useful indicator. But that is very different from saying that the objective should be growth indefinitely. I think that in poor countries, the objective should be to achieve certain social goals that are specified, and if growth is necessary toward that end to a certain point, then so be it. But the idea of pursuing GDP growth for its own sake indefinitely is pathological and absurd. So I don't think it should be part of the development agenda. But if we accept that, we must accept that some countries will have GDP growth towards improving well-being. Okay, Finland is not one of them that needs that, but many other countries might.
Okay, we are a minute to the lunch, so you have your last words for this group of people. They are all working full-time, and we are all working full-time with these topics. What's the most important thing we need to do now?
So I guess my pitch to you is simply that in addition to the beyond GDP stuff, I think the first most practical thing we can do is start thinking about the legislation that Finland and the EU can implement that will actively scale down material throughput in ways that don't negatively impact people's lives and access to resources they need. Okay, I've given you like a list of suggestions. These have been tried in models effectively. I think that they would be easy to implement in legislation, and so I think that it'd be interesting to see us take steps towards that direction. The country that is effective in implementing those kinds of material throughput measures first is going to be the one that is going to most rapidly achieve the kind of energy transition that we need by 2030. So.
Thank you very much, Jason Hickel. Warm applause.
Thank you.
And I didn't ask him to answer in the way he asked, even though when we come back from the lunch, that's exactly where we move to. We move to having a look at what could be those steps we recommend the governments over EU and EU to take. So legislation, let's keep that word in our heads while we go for lunch. And then in 45 minutes, we come back and meet here and start to work. Thank you very much.